right. Wow, what a great room. I see some familiar faces. It's nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me. I think today we'll retread just a little bit of what you've already heard, but I believe in spiral learning. I don't know about you. I need to hear a thing 3 times before I get it. And I just want to thank the center here for fostering the collaboration and innovation that I think is so necessary to address all sorts of issues, including PFAS, which honestly is one of the biggest challenges. We've got a lot of challenges, you know, climate change, but certainly PFAS is one of our biggest challenges that I have seen in my career. My name is Katie Angarone. You can call me Katrina if you're angry, like my mom, but I go by Katie. And I have the privilege of working, and the privilege and honor of working with the fine people at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, which serves as your environmental and public health regulator, steward, and most importantly, I think, as a science agency. I hope that today my remarks will give you a little bit of an idea of what our vision is, of what we've done in New Jersey. We have done groundbreaking work, but my gosh, there's a lot more to do, and I think we've heard that from everyone today. For many years, the DEP team has been working to identify the risk by spearheading global cutting-edge science, developing thoughtful policy around PFAS, and holding responsible parties accountable for PFAS pollution. And New Jersey, in fact, has set the tone, I think, for the nation in responding to the risks of PFAS, and I'm so proud to work with our team on that. And I think we've got some folks in the room. So again, I'm going to rehash some ground here a little bit, but I think we heard Senator Sarlo talk about how difficult it is for the public to understand this. This is one of the great graphics that I think we have out there on our website that shows how complex it is to get a handle on PFAS and why they're so ubiquitous in the environment. Discharges from air, from wastewater, products, firefighting foam, you name it, make their way into our soil, into our water, into our plants, into our animals, and even into us. So let's take a minute really quickly to remind ourselves about those human exposure effects. Studies have found a number of different health effects in people. For PFOA, which is the most well-studied of the PFAS, the most consistently found health effects are increases in serum cholesterol, some liver enzymes, uric acid, and decreased antibody response following vaccination. Infants and children, as we heard, may be more sensitive to those effects. In humans, exposure before birth, infancy, or in early childhood results in health effects, including decreased birth rate, decreased response to vaccination, and increased risk of infectious disease. In laboratory animals, PFAS, including PFOA, PFAS, and PFNA, caused developmental delays. PFAS and PFOA have been found to cause tumors in rodents. And in a community with substantial exposure to PFOA in drinking water, that exposure was associated with a higher incidence of kidney and testicular cancers. PFOA was also associated with an increased risk in kidney cancer in the general population in a more recent study conducted by the National Cancer Institute. So given these health effects, the department is committed to reducing exposure. All right. The state generally reduces exposure through regulation and also some other initiatives. And with respect to environmental protection, you may have noticed that, or maybe not, that New Jersey does things a little bit differently. We have to because we are different. First, we are extremely densely populated. Second, we have an industrial legacy, which means we've got PFAS at a higher rate than other places in the nation. And finally, we do things differently because our public and our state laws demand it. And I'm certainly glad I live here. New Jersey has a long and proud history of setting standards to protect our environment and our public health that often exceed the federal floor. So when it comes to PFAS, New Jersey really does have its own story. And I won't go through each milestone on this timeline, but I wanted to give you a sense of our action thus far, and then dive into a few of those places. So I also need to stop here and give a shout out to the innovators and the researchers who really have made this work possible. Scientists at US EPA's Office of Research and Development, a critical partner in this work. scientists within the department, in our water and remediation sectors, and our wastewater sector, or in academia. They've all worked to help us identify PFAS and develop analytical methodologies and test new technologies for treatment. So I have to thank them. But back to our story. I think it's worth noting that New Jersey's story really started a long time ago. In 2006, the department became aware that we had PFAS in drinking water, and we've been working on it since then. So far, we've set groundwater standards, we've listed certain PFAS as hazardous substances, which is really important because it gives our private well owners access to spill fund. We've conducted studies, released soil and leachate standards, and developed inhalation reference concentrations. And beyond what you see here, we also have fish consumption advisories. And we've established recently bioaccumulation factors, and we've filed litigation. All that said, the adoption of the nation's first ever PFAS drinking water standards certainly does stand out. So let's walk through that a little bit. About a year ago, US EPA adopted drinking water standards or maximum contaminant levels for 6 PFAS, including standards that are lower than some of our New Jersey standards. And you can see these side by side here. Like many other federal regulations, the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act rules are implemented by New Jersey, not by the federal government. DEP has what's known as primacy, meaning we are responsible for ensuring the administration and enforcement of both the state and federal drinking water standards. So when the federal government adopts a new MCL, DEP has to ensure that state and federal standards are aligned and that state rules are at least as stringent as those federal rules. And it's really important to note that the way that we develop standards in New Jersey is a little bit different than other places. And in fact, I'll note that there's a lot of states in the nation that are prohibited from doing what we do, which is a shame. We have what's called the Drinking Water Quality Institute, which is a panel of experts established by the New Jersey Safe Drinking Water Act who are responsible for making recommendations on the program as well as our drinking water standards. So why am I telling you that? Well, you might have noticed things have gotten a little weird in DC lately. And while our friends at EPA, I think, did the right thing adopting PFAS standards, by the way, the first new federal standards in quite a while that they had done, we wanted to review their work. And that's an important part of getting that primacy and adopting regulations. So the Institute reviewed US EPA's health basis for their health advisories, which then became the basis for their MCLs for PFOA and PFAS. And the Institute agreed that the evidence supports health-based standards that are in fact lower than New Jersey standards right now. That's pretty important because at DEP, we use the best available science. So we needed them to take a look at that. And there's quite a bit of uncertainty right now at the federal level. But let me be clear, there is no uncertainty in New Jersey's history. We use the best available science to protect our public, and no one should expect that to change. New Jersey protects the public, and we do that by reducing exposure. So we prioritize drinking water because water that contains PFAS has the potential to contribute to human exposure more than common sources such as food packaging, consumer products, house dust, those sorts of things, even indoor and outdoor air. And this is because given the frequency of ingestion, drinking water could contribute a significant portion of your overall exposure. And as I mentioned earlier, New Jersey does have a higher occurrence in drinking water than other states. So it's really no wonder that we moved ahead faster than any other state to reduce exposure to drinking water. To date, New Jersey has over 100 individual public water systems of all sizes that have incurred at least one New Jersey PFAS MCL violation. And given the lower numbers at the federal level, it's reasonable to expect that number would possibly double the number of water systems that will exceed those new standards as they come into effect. But public water systems are not alone. Private Well Testing Act data shows that we've also got PFAS in our private wells. In fact, data from 2021 to 2023 showed that 11.2% of wells tested contain levels above New Jersey MCLs. And because 12% or 1.1 million people in New Jersey, that's surprising sometimes, drink from private wells, that is not insignificant. So Our focus on drinking water, however, is really just the beginning. Remember that PFAS cycle? Drinking water systems are just the downstream user. PFAS is everywhere, and by the time it gets to your well or to your intake, it can have quite a pollutant load. So to continue to reduce exposure, we need to look upstream. And this is an important point that the commissioner made clearly in front of Congress at a hearing on the Clean Water Act earlier this year. He reminded us that we must be attentive to the reality that the environmental externalities we fail to avoid or correct in one sector often become a cost dislocated to another sector, and that taxpayers are too often the ones left holding the bag. He specifically noted that the lack of adequate pollution control on wastewater discharges must inevitably be addressed and can fall unfairly upon the shoulders of other users of the waterway, notably the drinking water systems. So, with an eye towards looking at PFAS holistically, let's talk about what we have done so far. There is so much work to do to clean this up in our environment, in our bodies, and it's a lot to take on, particularly for a problem that others caused. So the state recognized that, and that the responsibility for investigating and cleaning up PFAS really should fall to those who caused the contamination. So to that end, we have pursued several lawsuits in both state and federal courts seeking to hold manufacturers, industrial users, and dischargers of PFAS accountable for the injury caused, directly or indirectly, to the state's residents and other natural resources. PFAS is a really big problem. First and foremost, in problem solving, you have to understand the scope of the problem, the extent of the problem. So we've come a long way since we first started studying occurrence in 2008. Today we have a wealth of data in lots of media. We've got it in soils, drinking water, groundwater, surface water, and even fish tissue. And we are working to centralize that large body of data for the public. For example, you may not realize that we have a robust water monitoring network in New Jersey, and we have since 1976. We are sampling for a myriad of parameters, but since 2020, we've also been monitoring for PFAS. Our statewide ambient surface and groundwater networks are made up of 73 representative samples across the state, as well as 150 wells, respectively. This public data informs our policy. And PFAS may not be new, but there's still quite a bit that is unstudied. And so I'm glad that you're all gathering here to discuss it. DEP is funding the research on topics like plant uptake, PFAS in air, precipitation, and soils, as well as novel treatment approaches. And we're also keeping close with other states so that we're optimizing our efforts and any funding that we happen to have available for research. The federal government has, as I said, been a critical partner, but regrettably, there's a little bit of uncertainty about the much valued science branch of EPA, the Office of Research and Development right now. So it's very, very important that the states, particularly those at the forefront, Minnesota, North Carolina, Maine, et cetera, that we continue to collaborate and pursue that science that keeps us all safe, and we need to reach out to each other, and we're doing that. Now, if you're ever wondering what drinking water standards New Jersey's considering next, it's a pretty good bet to take a look at our groundwater standards. And these are often the first standards we issue because our remediation laws and the nature of their implementation. Remediation happens site by site and is typically on a much smaller scale than a drinking water system or drinking water treatment. Therefore, it calls for more immediate action. Interim standards can be issued to address public health threats in the short term in order to get those standards activated, and then we will follow through with the traditional rule process. That's kind of unique. New Jersey has adopted several groundwater standards well before MCLs. Our contaminated site remediation group is responsible for investigating and remediating contaminated sites across New Jersey. And that's the group that often calls for those interim standards as they encounter a new substance as they're cleaning up. And in doing so, it's necessary for DEP to develop soil remediation standards for different types of potential exposure scenarios, including dermal, ingestion, and migration to groundwater. And so we are always hard at work doing that. And when a new PFAS that we're concerned about pops up, and we develop these standards, of course, we've got to work with folks to make sure we have analytical standards. You need to be able to measure things. And finally, by adding certain PFAS to the list of hazardous substance, as I mentioned before, we are able to provide assistance to eligible homeowners, businesses, and government entities to address PFAS contamination in private wells through the Spill Fund Damage Claims Program. That's a lot. There are still so many gaps in our knowledge, though. When it comes to the science, it always feels like we are running to catch up, particularly with novel and alternative or replacement PFAS. Also, while US EPA has offered some guidance for disposal, there's a ton more to do in that space. We need more study and more certainty, particularly when it comes to understanding total destruction, and also when it comes to how compounds transform during processing of so-called PFAS-free processes. Without this information, we run the risk of just moving contamination from one part of the environment to the other, or introducing new problems unwittingly. And we must always work to ensure that we have those analytical methods, as I mentioned before. There's also a lot of discussion around consumer products, but we need to have a clearer picture of their contribution to occurrence in our water and in our environment. And there's no shortage of work, but I think we can truly be proud of what we've done so far. I often, through the Environmental Council of the States, get to see what's happening across the nation. And I have to say, I'm really proud of New Jersey. In a lot of spaces, we are ahead of the game. But there is still so much to do. As we advance to control exposure, we must continue to take all the actions you see on the screen. This is part of our strategy to identify, reduce, and eventually eliminate. You've got to start somewhere. And we certainly can't do all this on our own. We need input from the public, from health officials, and the experts on the ground, anyone who has anything to do with PFAS. And we certainly need help from researchers and innovators as well. We cannot make progress without them. So let's talk more specifically about what's coming next. As I mentioned, we're already pursuing research with universities and the federal government, and we're keeping close with other states that are pushing research forward. And we do this as funding and opportunity allow, but we need at the state a clear and prioritized science agenda. And that's something we're starting to pull together. I also mentioned that New Jersey has a ton of data and we're working to centralize it. Data is valuable, but not if you can't find it, and if it's not provided in a usable format. So we are working to put that in one place in some sort of tool so you can see it and you can analyze it. And that work, I think, will help us understand new sources and limit exposure. So stay tuned for that. Finally, opportunities like today for discussing PFAS across sectors, right? We get together a lot in the wastewater sector, in the water sector, but to do it all in the same room together is so critical. We need wastewater, air, solid waste, remediation, even agriculture, and all the sectors that are struggling with this. We need to find a forum to bring us all together so we can share information like today and learn from each other and figure out what's next. So we're working on that as well. And let's talk about drinking water for a minute. Like all sectors, we've got to be sure we have those analytical methods, that our methodologies are keeping pace with standards, and we've got to adopt those federal standards into our state rules and do it based on our experience in New Jersey, using discretion as appropriate. And you've probably heard that the substance-by-substance approach is no longer sustainable. In fact, the federal rules have a hazard index. We're in new territory with that. So there are some states, California, for example, who are taking a look at that, and we're going to need to evaluate those new approaches. And maybe you all could tackle that one today. That would be great. That's my challenge. And finally, given how many people drink from wells in New Jersey, this is my personal pet peeve, we need to remind them to test. Don't just test when you sell. Test once a year. And if we have any health officials out there, why isn't this on our intake form? Isn't it the most important thing to know where people are drinking their water from as you're trying to evaluate their health? So that's my personal plea. And if I say it in enough rooms, maybe it will be true. So what's next with groundwater and surface water? We got a lot of work to do in this arena as well. And while new standards can feel a little scary to certain sectors, in pursuit of identifying and reducing and eliminating, standards are pretty critical. So earlier this year, we did finalize those bioaccumulation factors. They are the first step in developing science-based surface water quality standards designed to address surface water discharges. You'll also see in every media we need those methods, and we also need to do more to understand the sediment in our waterways and whether or not there's PFAS there. In the remediation world, with each new groundwater standard that we release, we need to take the next step to adopt the soil and soil leachate standards. We're always working towards that. We've also got a statewide soil study that we'll release in the not so distant future that will perhaps give us some information about deposition. And I noted that we need to identify our sources. So we are working with our fire districts and the Department of Community Affairs to eliminate aqueous film-forming foam consistent with new laws, and we are looking to other states on how to decontaminate trucks and all the fun things that go along with that. And there are states that are making really good progress on ecological exposures, so we need to understand our next steps in New Jersey on that front as well. And beyond the plant uptake work that I talked about before, we also need to get a handle on PFAS in our flora and in our fauna. So, wastewater and air. At DEP, we believe in one water approach, meaning we understand that everything's connected, what we do on the land, what we discharge into the air or into the water, it all matters. It all ends up in our drinking water. So that means we need to look upstream and we need to identify where those compounds are entering our water cycle. And as part of that approach to identify, reduce, and eventually eliminate, we did ask our local wastewater agencies to determine potential sources that may be discharged into their systems, and more recently to take quarterly samples of their effluent, and residuals and analyze for the presence of 40 PFAS. And as we seek to understand our sources, we would be wildly remiss if we did not evaluate active and legacy landfills as well, so that is on our radar. On the air front, New Jersey, along with some other states, has petitioned the federal government to address air discharges by designating some PFAS as hazardous air pollutants. I think we need a plan B there, and we'll have to figure that out. We also need to better understand air discharges and the science that goes into monitoring, and we've been working with EPA on that front, and we will continue to work with other states as needed. And we also need to understand how PFAS moves through our wastewater treatment process, and that's something we're thinking about as well. Finally, we know that EPA has issued a risk assessment for biosolids. New Jersey just submitted comments on that, but we need to understand in our state if biosolids are a source that we need to address. So, anybody else feeling overwhelmed? As my children say, PFAS is a lot, it's kind of extra. The amount we don't know, the amount we have to do, the fact that these substances feel like they're forever and they're everywhere, it can feel a little overwhelming. And this is how I picture it, because I am terrified of tsunamis. It's my nightmare. But all of you in this room, you're my moment. Oh, the battery is running low. You're my moment of zen. Smart people working together to address a really wicked problem. Well, I think we've seen time and time again that that can work, and it can work really well. So I'm thankful for the work that you're doing here today. I'm thankful for the important conversations you're gonna have today. And I just wanna say, because sometimes our work is invisible, that certainly New Jersey is thankful, and because the nation tends to lead on this, or New Jersey tends to lead on this topic, and the nation follows, I think the nation's thankful. So thanks for lending me your ear and listening to everything we need to do.